I'd like to give you a word this morning. It's actually a phrase. So it's appropriate that this phrase comes on Mother's Day because I actually picked it up this past weekend from our children. The phrase is this: hold the door. Hold the door. Are any of you door holders? Yeah. Well, actually, what got me thinking about it is our youngest child was telling us a story about holding the door for someone and the response that came with it. And this is a sermon in and of itself. You're not always going to get the response you think when you hold the door, right? But holding the door is important. We teach our children to hold the door for each other, for their mother. I hope you'll hold the door for a mother today on this their day. We teach them to hold the door for the elderly and elders and those who are older. And we teach our children to hold the door for people who have their hands full. Man, that's another sermon right there in just a sentence. Holding the door for people with their hands full. So, I don't know about you, but I was raised to hold the door. In fact, it was good manners I was taught just to hold the door. My grandmother would rebuke me if I walked in the door and the door closed behind me. Today we live in an age of automatic doors and doors that open on their own. And so I've noticed, and I don't know if you've noticed, but that custom or that tradition has kind of gone by the wayside, as it were. In fact, I'm old enough to remember when we didn't have automatic doors. And I remember when you used to go to the cities and they'd say, man, them people in New York are just rude, aren't they? They're just different. And part of it was, I remember going to New York for the first time, and they didn't have automatic doors back then when I went to New York. And the issue was there's so many people coming through those doors that you just don't hold the door or you're liable to be there all day. And so the custom of holding the door gets passed down through our children. I love to watch our children hold the door for each other. I think God likes to watch His children hold doors for each other. Graduation this past week, our oldest graduated. Do you know what she was doing? She was holding the door for those who are following her, for her brother and her sister. She's holding the door. You graduates, that's really what you're doing when you graduate this month. Whether it's high school or college or even further than that, what you are actually doing is holding the door. Why? Because somebody held the door for you. Somebody might have been the first one in your family to hold that door so that you could walk through it. The tradition of holding the door is not just a matter of common courtesy. It's deeper than that. In fact, there was a time, if you go back further enough, and I'm not from the medieval times, even though my kids may think I am. I don't go back that far, but in medieval times, doors were heavier. They were barriers. And it literally took somebody who was strong to hold the door so that you could enter it. And then there was a time, not too long ago, in this country that if you saw a mother carrying a child or someone with their hands full, like I said, you would hold the door for them. It's a custom. And I'm old enough to remember that when holding the door at one time in our culture was not just a matter of chivalry, but they were some people that thought it was condescending if you would hold the door. And yet, I continued to hold the door. And that's what I'm here to tell you to do today, is hold the door. I think that's what John is trying to do for us this morning. He's holding the door open for us that we can walk through it. The 21st chapter of John is kind of an anomaly, really. If you read it, it probably shouldn't even have been there. Did you ever read the end of chapter 20? I mean, we usually skip over it, but let me read it for you. This is the end of chapter 20. And if you have a study Bible, it probably says this: the purpose of John's gospel. Sounds like an ending to me. Now listen to what it says after that. Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of His disciples, which are not recorded in this book, But these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you might have life in his name. End of chapter 20. It seems to be the end of the book, but it's not. Why? Because John is wanting to hold the door for us into a whole nother realm, a whole nother world. Chapter 21 opens up the Bible and the gospel further than just the disciples. Chapter 21 opens the Bible up to the world and those beyond the disciples. You see, Jesus keeps showing up. John says in chapter 21, this was the third time at least he appeared to his disciples. The point being is Jesus keeps showing up. We saw him show up in the garden. We saw him show up in a home. We saw him show up on the road. And now we're seeing him show up in the workplace. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But the point is here is Jesus keeps showing up. This is an open door for those of you who think that Jesus' story was just a one-time, one and done. He's gone, it's over. No. He's risen. He's still risen. And he will show up in the most ordinary places so that you might find him. John, the writer of this gospel, is holding the door so that we might see that. And here's the best part of all. It happens to them as it should happen to us, that this occurs in the middle of everyday life. Again, not at the temple, not when they were having a prayer meeting, but when they were in the workplace, an ordinary place that they would have had to have gone, an ordinary place made extraordinary. And I would say to you that this workplace experience, encounter, is probably the most human of it all. Think about this as we continue on. This is the most human. You see, what do the disciples do? After they've had at least 2 experiences of the risen Jesus, after they've had their Easter, he appears to them again in the home, John says. Thomas wasn't there, so he comes back again. So I don't know if John's math is bad or mine's just better, but this may have been the 4th appearance of Jesus. But anyway, there was the garden, and then there was the home, and now Jesus shows up again. Now here's the thing. I don't know about you, but if Jesus keeps showing up, I believe I'm going to be looking for him, right? They weren't. In fact, they just go back to doing what they did before they encountered Jesus. And I want to tell you that this is the most human thing of all. It's not that we don't encounter Jesus, that he won't show up for us, and we're guilty of not seeing it when he does. I think a lot of us get nudges from Jesus. He'll show up, he'll knock at our door, we'll know it's him, we'll look out the peek hole, and then we'll just go back to doing what we always did. And this is why this is the most human. You see, they've had 2 encounters with Jesus recently, and they're going back to what is familiar, what is usual, what is normal to them. They're back fishing. Now they're where they're supposed to be. He said, go to Galilee. They did that. You see, sometimes we're right where we're supposed to be, but we're not even looking for Jesus. Let that one set for a minute. So here's the first thing I want you to know. We need to hold the door, and we need to hold the door for Jesus. This John, when he writes the Revelation, the book you guys wish I would preach on every Sunday, Revelation, when John talks about the risen Jesus showing up in Revelation, do you know what he says? Out of Jesus' mouth comes these words, "Behold, I stand at the door and I knock. And if you let me in, I will come into you and we will dine together." Now I'm going to get to the table next week, but the point is, Jesus is at the door. For John, this is the ultimate way that Jesus comes to us. He stands at our door and knocks. Our ordinary door, our common door, a door at the workplace. And our job as human beings is to open it up to him and let him in. Not check the boxes before we let him in, to open the door and let him in. Now this idea is magnified in John 21, and I want you to see it. I already told you they're back to doing what they normally did. But guess what? They're failing at the familiar. They're failing. Listen, If you read the list of people in this story in John 21, there's 7 of them, the perfect number, and at least half of them are fishermen. Peter, fisherman. James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Zebedee was a fisherman. They were fishermen. There are 2 unnamed, so that kind of skews it, but at least half of them were fishermen. Now, failing at something they were trying anew because of Jesus might have stood out to us and we would have said, well, that makes sense. If they would have went and tried to be accountants like Matthew and they were failing at that, if they were trying to be tax, they weren't. They weren't trying something new. They were going back to what they were, professional fishermen. John wants to drive home this point. They closed the door to Jesus, just like they did when they were in the house. They closed the door to Jesus. They're back to doing what they know best, and they're failing at the familiar. They fished all night. And how many fish did they catch, Raj? Not nary a one. And here's the best part. Jesus punctuates it. Because they had fished all night, he's about 100 yards away on the shore, and he says, friends, which also translates in the Greek, children, have you any fish? Now, if you have fished all night, you've snuck away from your family to do some fishing, and you haven't caught a fish, you've got nothing in your basket, that is the last thing you want to be asked as you're coming toward the dock. Have you got any fish? Well, I want to make an excuse. Well, it's awful windy out there, Jesus. It sure was. The wind was heavy. I think the water was too warm, you know. There's just the water. But they didn't make any excuses, right? Now, if you go fishing all night, and you went away all night, and you're coming back home, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sneak in and hide my fishing pole, and I'm going to not let anyone know what I was doing. And I'm not even a good fisherman. These guys were pros. So how do they answer Jesus? Friends, have you any fish? Have you had any luck? You guys are pros, he says. They don't make any excuses. No blame. No. Read it right there. It's in John 21. No pretense, nothing. They just say, no, we haven't caught a thing. Jesus says to them, Davis read it for you, cast your net to the right side. And I bet these guys had fished all night. I bet one of them was sitting there thinking, I wish I would have thought of that. Come on, Jesus, have you got anything better? Come on, we've been out here all night. It doesn't make any sense. But they try it anyway. They trust anyway, even though they've done it all night, even though they've done it their whole lives, even though they had forgotten more about fishing than most people ever knew, they trusted him anyway. I'm going to tell you a story. My first recollection of fishing was this. My dad took me out in the backyard and we turned over some rocks, and when that didn't work, we dug a hole and we pulled out some earthworms. And we took these earthworms with a cane pole. Do you know what that is? It was a bamboo pole that went together and just had a string on it and a bobber and a hook. And we went down to Pine Creek, which was kind of close to where we lived. Now, my dad wasn't a fisherman. He wasn't like Zebedee. He just took me because he knew that was something that a young boy would want to do. And so instead of going down to the bank of Pine Creek, he stood up high on the bank where he could just watch me and enjoy his son fishing. But guess what? It's my first time I ever fished that I can remember. I wasn't catching a thing. I remember throwing that. It wasn't like you could cast it. You just kind of had to swing it easy so you didn't lose your bait. And so that old bamboo pole would sit there and the bobber would just seem like forever and didn't even move. And eventually my dad said, move downstream. Well, why did he say that? Well, he was up on the bank where he could see some sunfish at the top of the water. And when I moved just a little bit downstream, guess what? That old bobber went whoop, underneath, and the fight was on, baby. I caught a monster sunfish. Here's the point. Even doing things that are normal for us, our everyday in our workplace, we need someone with a vantage point other than ours. We need someone who stands on a shoreline we haven't arrived at yet, telling us we're not in the right place so that we are successful in the thing that we are purposed to do. Can I tell you, these guys were pros, and the person on the shore that they hadn't arrived at yet wanted them to be successful at what they were doing. Why is it that when we go through our day-to-day, we don't think Jesus is interested in that? Why is it that when we leave the church and we return to the ordinary, we close the door as if Jesus has nothing to say about where we're fishing or who we're fishing for? God wants every part of your life. God wants to be in every part. He wants you to be successful in every part of your life. Mothers, your first job is to be a mother. That's it. End of story. The other job is just to support yourself and the child if you have another job. But your first calling is to be a mother. Fathers, I'll tell you the same in a couple weeks, as Paula said. Your first job, why would we not invite God to help us fish with our children? Why would we not ask the one who's on the seashore, who can see the things that we can't see, to be with us as we're fishing in life? Our job, first and foremost, is to hold the door open for Jesus so He can walk through and that He can give us life and have it abundantly. That's the end of 20. That's the payoff. What would it look like if you actually opened the door for Jesus in your day-to-day life? What would your workplace look like if first and foremost you invited Jesus to come into it? What would that pesky coworker look like to you who's a newbie, who doesn't know what you didn't know not too long ago? What would they look like to you if you invited Jesus in, that you could see them with His eyes instead of your eyes? What would it look like when people are going around and doing workplace gossip and talking about each other if you had the ears of Jesus with you at all times? Do you see how this works? He not only wants us to be good. He not only wants us to be adequate. He wants us to have life abundant. Can I tell you one other thing that's a special note in this story? How many fish did they catch? Does anyone know off the top of their head? 153. Do you expect me to give you some kind of newfangled interpretation of what that number means? I'm sure you came here for that. How many fish was it? 153. Do you know what the significance to that is biblically? Not a thing. I mean, I've looked it up. I poured over it, baby. I wanted to come in here and flash you with some brilliance, but I couldn't do it. 153. You know what that is? I think that's just a very practical number. Do you know what fishermen do? They tell you the exact number of fish they catch. Hey, I know people that go to Okeechobee. They can tell you on this day and on this spot how many fish they caught. Do you know that's why I believe that the gospel is true? John writes in details like this that are so real life that if it didn't happen, it wouldn't even be in there. 153 fish. Do you know what that means? Really? A lot. They caught a lot of fish. And before that, they hadn't caught any. Why? Because they opened the door for Jesus. They let Him come in. They let Him be a part of their profession. They invited Him in. What would it look like if you invited Jesus into your workplace? If you said, not my will, God, but your will, God. Not my way, God, but your way, God. What would your workplace be? Would it be a place of adequacy, just getting by, paycheck to paycheck? Or would it be a place of abundance, where the provision of God flows through you while at the workplace? That's the first thing in John 21. We need to open the door for Jesus, but that's not the last thing. There is a greater responsibility than that. We need to hold the door for others. That's the point of John 21. If we ended at John 20, the disciples would have experienced Jesus. They would have saw their miracles, and John said, there's many more I didn't write about. I could have. In fact, he goes on at the end of 21, and he repeats that. If you look at the end of 21, he says in verse 25, Jesus did so many other things. If I wrote them all down, the whole world couldn't contain it. It's the same ending again. But what happened between 21 and 20? He's holding the door for others to see. It's not just about the disciples. It's not just about them. It's not just a one-and-done experience. It's about a Jesus, a risen Lord, who continues to show up and who continues to care for those who he loves and those who are his, just like a good mother would do, just like a good father would do. The one who shows up, we are supposed to hold the door so that others can walk through it too. And I'll show you how this happens. And I'm not going to read it all to you because it would take forever. You don't want me to read. You don't pay me to read. You pay me to tell you. So here's what's happening. They're out fishing. This stranger on the beach who has a familiar voice, I don't know why they didn't know it was Jesus. Lord, they saw him a lot. I can't explain that to you. It may have been foggy that day for all I know. They could just hear his voice. But when they caught 153 fish, John says to Peter, "It is the Lord." Now I want you to get this in your sanctified imagination. I want you to think about Peter. What does Peter do? It says that he put on his garment and dove in. Now that's another detail that if this wasn't real, it makes no sense. I don't know about you, but when I go in the water, I don't put on garments, I take off garments. And what it tells me is Peter was fishing in less clothing than the people I like to fish with, and I ain't fishing with a fellow like that. But if that detail's not in there, this isn't a real story. But so in your imagination, think about Peter. He's putting on his garment because they say in the tradition, the religious tradition, when you were meeting someone, it was inappropriate to be less than dressed. And so he puts on a garment. He dives into the water. They're 100 yards out, so it might have been chest deep, maybe a little more, but you can imagine him running, half swimming. Have you ever tried to do that through the surf? You kind of fall. You can see him falling his way toward Jesus. Now, what's on his mind? This is Peter. That in the gospel story, prior to chapter 20, he had denied Jesus in the courtyard. Do you remember that? Jesus said to Peter, "You will deny me 3 times. No way, Jesus, I ain't denying you. I love you, Jesus. I'll never do that. What happens? He's in the courtyard. They ask him, I don't know the man. 3 different times he does that. So when he's out on the boat and he's fishing and he discovers that it is Jesus, as he's making his way and falling into the surf, I imagine him thinking, is the door still open? Is it possible that he still loves me? And so he makes his way to Jesus. He invites him to sit down. He has them a big breakfast. They're having a meal, a salvation meal, if you will. I love that. And he does something very peculiar with Peter. How many times did Peter deny Jesus? 3. If you read John 21, Jesus asks him 3 questions. It's actually the same question 3 times. Peter, do you love me? What's Peter say? Yes, I love you, Lord. Do you see what's happening there? That's restoration. 3 times restoration. 3 times denied, 3 times restored. But here's what really matters. It's not just about Peter. It is about Peter, but it's not just about Peter. Here's what happens. Peter, do you love me? Yes, Lord, I love you. What's Jesus say next? Feed my sheep. Oh, so it's not just about Peter. I'm restoring you, Peter, so that you can go and restore others. I'm restoring you, Peter, so that you can hold the door for someone else. I am the door, Peter. I'm restoring you so somebody can walk through it. 3 times he denied. 3 times he's restored. And each and every time after he restores Peter, he says, feed my sheep. We are to hold the door for someone else. I told you this already. I was called into the ministry when I didn't want to be called. God called me up from my vocation, out of my ordinary to the extraordinary, and the only reason I am a preacher and a pastor here is to hold the door for someone else. To tell you that God is real. He was real to me, but not only me, and He wants to be real to you. So here's the payoff. This is the whole reason I got up this morning. The restoration of Peter and your restoration and your encounter with God is not only for you. It's supposed to be a door that you hold for someone else. Resettle. Let me preach to you just for 1 second and I'll leave you alone. What happened back there is not the end of the chapter. It's not the final celebration. It's a door. And that door was open to you through Jesus Christ. And now your only job, your only vocation for the rest of your life is to hold that door open so that someone might walk through it. Church, I came this morning to tell you to hold the door. I want you to hold the door for the mother who's carrying 2 car seats and carrying more anxiety than you can ever imagine. I want you to hold the door for that mother. I want you to hold the door for the dad who's working 2 jobs and doesn't have a minute to rest. He hasn't sat down since 5 a.m. I want you to hold the door for him. Students, I want you to hold the door for the person who sits alone at the cafeteria eating by themselves as if that meal is an isolation meal, not a community meal. I want you to hold the door for them. Christians, I want you to hold the door for the new hire that you're working with that's an annoyance to you. And I want you to understand that God alone provided you with your job. And your job now is to hold the door for them and to show them that your job and your work is only by the grace of God. I want you to hold the door, Christians. Hold the door for the alcoholic and the addict who's just trying to make their way through Sunday. Hold the door for the woman who longed to be a mother and never got the chance. Hold the door for the mother who buried her child and the child who buried her mother, who for them Mother's Day is a really sore reminder of things that are happening in real life. Hold the door for them. Hold the door like Jesus has shown up for you. Hold the door like Jesus is still risen for you. Hold the door like He's risen today. Hold the door like He will be risen tomorrow. Hold the door so somebody can walk through it. Hold the door because somebody held it for you. Somebody held the door for you when your hands were full. Somebody held the door for you when you didn't deserve it. Somebody held the door for you when you had already slammed it shut in His face. Peter knew about that door. Mary, not the mother, she knew about the door. Mary Magdalene, she knew about the door. And guess what? Every one of us in here that has been through Easter Sunday knows something about that door. Hold the door. Because holding the door isn't just a manner of good conduct or a social moray that we're passing along. Holding the door is making God manifest for someone who really needs them. Holding the door is saying that the tomb is empty and Jesus rolled back the door so that we could walk through and see what God has done. He's still holding that door this morning. He's held it for me. He's probably held it for many of you. And He stands at the door. Hold the door for those who need it. He's still risen. He will come to you in your ordinary, in the places you don't think He can reach. He will show up and He will show out, and He will make your ordinary extraordinary if you will simply hold the door. Now, if you haven't made Jesus the Lord of your life, this is the door that is open for you. If you haven't claimed Him as Lord and Messiah, what's that even mean? That means giving Him your all. To call somebody Lord is about as big as it gets. I surrender all. That's a song that we love to sing. That's what you're doing this morning. The door is open. The altar is here. Come if the Spirit leads you to come.